And now I want to go on to our Parsha. I will precede that with a few words about what's happening in Israel. As I mentioned last night, we're in a very critical time right now, I'm very sad to say. The misinformation, propaganda, perversity in reporting is very high. If I'm just going to take the kinds of communications I receive from our synagogue members, other people part of the Oratora community, even family and friends, people are very distressed because people are calling them, ending friendships, very angry. People get into very bitter conversations and aren't quite sure how to handle them. I want to remind you again of a few things, and it's very important in my mind that we know how to manage these conversations. Now, I want to tell you kind of from a deep perspective why, and then drill it down. From my perspective, what happened on October 7th was the front line of a great war of ideas happening in the world today. And I'm not exaggerating. There's a part in Islam where there is a vision, truly, I'm not making this up, just go ahead and look at it. A vision for world conquest. If you look in Islamic thought, the world is divided into two regions. Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam, which means submitted to the religion of Islam. Dar al-Islam, Islam means submission. And Dar al-Harb, which means the world of the sword. Anything not submitted is subject to the sword. Okay. Now, especially areas that Islam used to rule, but lost, for example, to the Christians or the Jews. So since the Muslims used to rule Spain, for them, the fact that Spain was taken back from Muslims is a particular concern, and therefore Spain, for example, is Dar al-Harb in particular, means it must be reconquered. The state of Israel is a particular injury to Muslim consciousness, because not only was a part of Dar al-Islam, as it were, taken from the world of Islam, from their perspective, it was the result of a Western incursion, a Western Christian incursion into their world. Now, from a Jewish perspective, remember, Jews immigrated to Turkey as part of the Turkish Empire. There's no desire to conquer anything Islamic. It was moving to a region called Palestine. There's no country called Palestine. There is no conscious Palestinian state. It was immigration permitted by Turkey. Nothing was stolen. When the area was taken over by the British, nothing was stolen. It was permitted by the British Empire. When the violence broke out between the Jews of Palestine and the Arabs of Palestine, the same region, the United Nations granted half of the area of Palestine to the Jews. The Jews didn't do that. So I say to people, if you want to blame anybody, blame the Turks, blame the British, and blame the UN. The Jews didn't do it to anybody. They weren't colonists. They were immigrants. You have to drill that. Immigrants, not colonists, not conquerors. They came peaceably. It only became a war when the UN divided up the land and the Arab side attacked the nascent Jewish state. So you must have that very clear in your mind. There is no colonization. There is no conquest. It's simply called immigration. Immigration to Turkey, the British mandate. The UN created the state, not the Jewish people. It was the UN. Now, what's happening now is simply a continuation of the war over the land. Hamas and the Palestinians, and I would say any part of Islam that is propelled by Iranian thought, which is the destruction of the state of Israel, is simply a war over land. They want the land and to kill the Jews. It's simple. If anybody says, what's this all about? All the politics, all the information, you want to drill it down to the simplest version possible. Iran wants to destroy Israel. It has two proxy armies on Israel's border, Hezbollah and Hamas. They want to destroy the state of Israel, murder all the Jews, probably all Israelis of any religion or type. What they want to do with the land, hard to know. I don't think they have a long-term plan for it. In the interim, in the unlikely event that they will be able to defeat Israel, in the interim, the goal is to kill Israelis. What happened on October 7th? Was there a real plan to defeat Israel in war? No. People say, well, why did they do it? People say to me, well, they were oppressed. Oppressed people retaliate. I said, okay. There's a lot of oppressed people, but they don't butcher people. They don't gag pregnant women, tie them to trees, and cut the children out of their bellies. That's not what oppressed people do. Those are what terrorists do. These were atrocities. Anybody who says they just lost their minds, they're like animals and they couldn't take it anymore. Animals broke out of a cage. That is such an insult to the people of Gaza that they just reverted to an animalistic nature. They planned a war to murder Israelis. Israelis have the right to self-defense and to take the threat off their border. Okay? It's very simple. Anybody who says ceasefire says defeat for Israel in its attempt to destroy Hamas. That's what it means. Ceasefire means defeat for Israel. Ceasefire means Hamas rebuilds, and does it again. There was a ceasefire in place on October 6th. There already was a ceasefire. They broke the ceasefire. They promised, if there's a ceasefire, there will be 1,000 more October 7th. They're on record. That's what they have promised. Don't be fooled by the idea of a ceasefire. Last thing I want to say this morning is about the civilian casualties. It distresses us when non-combatants are killed, but because I know some history, I know that our country, the British, the French, the Russians, we prosecuted the war against Germany until the very end, until the Nazis surrendered. There's a lot of civilian casualties in Germany. We were bombing Germany day and night. The Russians were invading from the east. It was a merciless army against a merciless enemy. It was fought till the end of the war. There was nobody crying out, stop trying to defeat Hitler. Too many Germans are dying, because all Hitler had to do was surrender. All the Japanese had to do was surrender. So I want us to go back to 1944, 1945. Did the Allies stop the war against Hitler and Imperial Japan, two genocidal states, because too many of their civilians were getting killed? No, we did not. What was the best way to stop the civilian casualties? For these two terrorist, genocidal, tyrannical regimes to surrender. That's all they had to do. But notice, no one is asking Hamas to surrender. They're asking Israel to surrender, because for Israel to grant a ceasefire is to surrender the war. So we might get confused here because we feel sorry for civilian casualties, because we don't want to accept that the world prefers that there be murdered Israelis into the future than actually to extirpate an evil regime as evil as Nazi Germany and as evil as Imperial Japan. It's very simple. I can say it in 5 minutes. I believe we all have to memorize these 5 minutes. Whenever anybody says anything, you have to have this loaded, ready to go, put it out there. Don't argue with anybody. If they say, yeah, I'd rather there be a ceasefire, Hamas rebuild, do this again, say, okay, that's your opinion. Israel doesn't. Israel is under no obligation, in my mind, to allow an evil regime to continue to exist and just wait for the next one, right? Not after October 7th. Maybe before this game of shoot rockets, Israel retaliates, but that game is over. So I hope all of you stay strong. I hope you are very firm in your moral convictions. I hope you are very, very firm in your knowledge of the situation. You're able to enlighten other people and have them understand that there's something very serious at stake. It's not just two bickering parties fighting a war. There's actually something about the nature of the world. All right, that's my message for this morning on Israel. Before I go to my talk on the Parsha, does anybody have any questions or comments about my message on Israel this morning? I'm going to go ahead and look at our assembled people. Seeing if there's any hands up or any yellow hands. Yosh, can you show me the second screen, please? Okay. All right, well, let's just take a deep breath. That's very important to get out. But now I'd like to go to some ideas on the Parsha. Another way to put it is, what's happening in the inner life of the Jewish state? And here's something amazing for me I wanted to share with you as I segue to the Parsha talk today. When Meirav and I went to Israel in December, January, it's a wounded, shattered state. I mean, the sense of violation is everywhere you go. But when Shuli wanted to meet with me and Meirav to meet with her friends, I thought I was going to be discussing the trauma. They didn't want to discuss trauma. They said, what's this thing called the spiritual psychology of the Kabbalah? They wanted to know. Now, in the room where I taught these kids, I want to remind you, one kid said to me, he was a kid with a, what I would call a hippie shirt and a very colorful beanie, beard, musical kid, very interested. I said, so I said, what did happen on October 7th? He said, I was in the Air Force. I loaded bombs on planes. I said, what did you do? He said, I got in my car, I drove down there. He said, I didn't have a weapon or anything. I just drove to Gaza. I said, what happened? He says, I found some soldiers. They gave me a pistol and I went straight to battle. Okay? And there's so many stories of simple Israelis, the kids in the room that I sat and taught, they just drove their cars down there. Now they're back. When we sat in that room, they don't want to talk about the war. Their hearts are broken. Their hearts are shattered. But they didn't want to talk about the borders of Israel, but the heart of Israel. Meaning, what drives the Jewish people? What drives the Jewish people is not war. What drives the Jewish people, in my mind, ideally, is the world of values, the world of ideas, and the world of spirituality for those who choose it. So I don't want to talk about the borders of Israel right now, but I want to talk about the heart of Israel. And the heart of Israel throbs in our Torah. And one reason we're so passionate for the state of Israel is the state of Israel preserves more than anywhere else in the world the heart of our culture and the heart of our learning. So in honor of what we're fighting for, we're fighting for survival, we're fighting for survival of something very, very deep, which is an ancient tradition that throbs in us today and will extend into the future. So what's our focus for today? I want us all to remember that as we look at the beauty of the Mishkan, I want to share with you a line that I mentioned earlier today, a line that I read in the Sfat Emet this morning, my favorite Hasidic text. And he's asking, why does the Torah portion go into such detail on all of the elements of the Mishkan? And why does Moshe have to give a reckoning, meaning all the pikudim, all the elements of the Mishkan? Why does the Torah take so much effort in sharing that? And what he says is this: the putting together of the Mishkan is an example of what he calls makom hapirud, that the world of separation, the world of fragmentation. We all live in a world of fragmentation. Now think of all of the elements of the Mishkan before they were assembled. You had wood, you had animal skins, you had precious stones. Try to imagine it's all scattered about. Try to imagine at the construction site, everything is laying out for, let's say, for a full square couple of miles. Everything is laid out. And you say, that's the Mishkan. That's not the Mishkan. What you have to do is refine the wood, refine the jewels, put everything in setting. You have to have an architect assembling everything. What kind of people? People of generous heart. People of wise, skillful hearts. They're now going to put this together. So the raw material is the world of Perud. It's assembled to make a sanctuary where the divine can rest. So we all live in the realm between the world of Perud and the world where the Perud, the disassembled world, is assembled. And with, you might say, the two great minds behind it, Moshe the prophet, Bezalel the architect, they're in charge of the idea that there's a divine image in the mind of God that must be assembled in the world below. There's a divine image in the mind of God that must be assembled in the world below. Moshe is the archetypal prophet, the one who's able to see into the higher world. Bezalel is the one who can render the higher world into our world. Just hold this idea. So, what are our building blocks? Now, we are Moshe, which means we have the capacity to peer into the higher world. Maybe most of us, not all the time, maybe not frequently. In fact, I just had a discussion with a couple of guys walking down my street. I want to share with you an anecdote where a couple of I have a Chabad rabbi living 2 houses down, so now and then his young Hasidim walk by my house, and I'm giving away books, and I gave him a couple of books, and they wanted to know more about me. And I shared, oh, by the way, I study Chabad Hasidus. I study the Chabad meditation manuals on the fabulous Chabad website, where you have some of the greatest meditation texts all assembled. And I shared with them, I study it, and we started talking about Kabbalah and the Ein Sof and so forth, and they shared with me. I talked about the brokenness of the divine, and they said, well, it's an idea that a human being cannot understand until the Messiah comes. Never heard that before. I said, it's understandable. He said, how can anybody understand that the infinite nature of God has gone through a brokenness? It's impossible for a person to understand it. We won't understand it till the Messiah comes. That's what they were taught. Made me sad because I think they were taught this because they were taught you can't understand it. You'll only understand it when the Messiah comes. I said, well, I beg to differ. I don't want to disagree with whoever taught you that, but I have to share with you. I have a different opinion. They said, what's your opinion? Well, there's something called the spiritual experience of Mashiach. It's not until the Messiah comes in history, but until the Mashiach, I'm trying to use their language, arrives inside of you. So how does that happen? I said, well, I've studied meditation manuals on the Chabad website. I actually sent them a link. I had them on my phone. And I said, you study, and you study, and you study, and your soul assembles it. The study actually creates a receptacle. The study creates, you say, a blueprint that the soul assembles. So the soul is assembling a structure in the inner life. You might say there's some realm of the divine that notices that the structure is being built. I can't fully justify the metaphor, but I know this. If I want to experience the mysteries of Kabbalah, I have to study. I have to break my heart on it. Right? Now, I take it in through my conscious mind, but that's not enough. Knowledge and understanding is not enough. That I'm sure of this. You take it in and it goes down to the soul, and the soul works in a silent way. The soul is where you have Betzalel and all the elements of wisdom and generosity of spirit. They're all together working down in the soul in an unseen, silent way. And one day, as you're studying, it's as if you're studying and the work of the soul, Melechet HaNefesh, the work of the soul, suddenly they line up and you have a moment and you can see. And I described to them, I said to these two young men, in my opinion, this is just Rabbi Finley, I'm not your Rebbe, I'm just who I am. If you study enough, if you say the right text enough with the right kavanah, the right intentionality, then you can build the Mishkan within. Something in the higher realms notice there's a finished Mishkan. The light of the divine will rest into the Mishkan, and then you can perceive into the mysteries of the Kabbalah. Okay? It's happened with me. It's happened with many, many of you. And so I shared this with them. And they said, okay, can we come and study with you? I said, ask your rabbi, you can come and study with me. I'd be happy to take you into this world. And I would like us to, when we reformulate, and I think about our wisdom classes curriculum, if anybody really wants to study these Hasidic meditation manuals on how exactly to build the inner structure in the nefesh where you can experience the divine mysteries, and this is available to any person watching this morning. You just have to put the work into it. And I'm happy to take you where I've been. So for me, this is the idea of the Mishkan. It's built with these three qualities of wisdom, knowledge, and chokhmah, tevunah, and dat. Let me break those down a little bit. So I want to give to you my own understanding of these three terms. They're not canonical understandings. They're not the official understandings. The way I've developed them over time. The term chokhmah, the term wisdom. For me, the term chokhmah has, for our purposes today, two distinct meanings. Two very distinct meanings. One meaning of chokhmah is access into the wisdom of the higher realm. It's more than knowledge. It's knowledge that's connected to experience, which means you can read the books on Kabbalah. You can give lectures on the Kabbalah. You can be knowledgeable in the Kabbalah. But to access higher wisdom, you're going beyond knowledge. Knowledge here is just the ladder. It's not where your consciousness goes when you climb the ladder. With knowledge, you can build the ladder. That's not the same thing as climbing the ladder and arriving into the higher realms. And that explains to me one reason I've met so many professors of Kabbalah who have never been there, which means they have knowledge, but they didn't achieve what I'll call the upper world wisdom that they call Chokhmah Shel Mala, the wisdom of Mala, the wisdom of the upper realms. It's a term from the Midrash. Chokhmah, wisdom, Shel Mala, the wisdom of the upper realms. That's one meaning of the word Chokhmah that is at the core of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, and I think human spirituality. Chokhmah Shel Mala, the ascent into not just the knowledge of the higher world theoretically, but the knowledge of the higher world experientially. Now, skeptics don't believe it exists. If you've been there, it is the most real thing that exists. Our lives here are pale and two-dimensional compared to the mystical experience. And once you have the mystical experience, you have a few drives. I've shared this before. One drive is to get back. Now that you've been to the most real place, you have to get back. The next drive is to create a map. We'll call that the Kabbalah. The third drive is to tell other people. So I remember the first time I had this full experience of the experiential knowledge of the higher realm, I came back down. I thought to myself, how did I do that and how do I do it again? Let me find the map. I don't want that to be a one-time random experience. I felt it was a gift from God. I didn't feel I earned it. I feel it was a gift, a gracious gift from God. But now I'm the one that has to figure out the system. And the next thing was to tell other people that this is there. I think the community that gathers around this morning, none of you doubt that it's there. Many of you have been there. And part of what our community is, as we transform into a wisdom institute, is to share the wisdom on the facticity of mystical knowledge, the transformative nature of mystical knowledge, and how to create the map and the techniques, and how to tell other people. That's one meaning of chokhmah, of wisdom. The other meaning of wisdom, it's the same word, but they have two very different meanings for me. Wisdom, for me, is a person. Second meaning, meaning number two. The person who has knowledge of life, the human condition, insight into themselves, insight into others, the processes that people go through, true knowledge of these things. A wise person knows what to do next. Now, try to imagine a person who has insight into themselves, can say, yeah, I think I know what they're going through. I know where we are. So what do we do next? The person says, I don't know. I don't know what to do next. Well, we would call that person maybe a person of insight, a person of knowledge, but a wise person says, and here's what you need to do next. And by the way, as you know, one of the approach that I have in figuring out this wisdom works and why some people come to study wisdom works and don't go to traditional therapy, they say to me, the therapist won't tell them what they need to do next. And I understand it. Because one of the ideas of therapy is that the therapand, in the talking method, talks about their experience, and they're supposed to, as it were, arrive on their own. And the job of the therapist is not to be a spiritual guide with a point of view, but rather kind of an open receptacle. By the way, this is two very different definitions of both therapy and coaching, and even spiritual direction. One theory of spiritual direction is you guide people to figure it out on their own, but you never advise. I thoroughly disagree. I think every person needs another person with whom they can share their journey and then seek the wisdom of their witness to give them guidance. For someone to say, now that you know everything I need to tell you, can you offer me guidance? The most generous, loving thing a person can say is, yes, I will offer you guidance. It's what I've absorbed from this. I'll offer guidance. I don't know if it's right or wrong, true or false, but I will tell you what I think. As a person who says, it's not my job to offer guidance. Can you imagine opening your heart to somebody? Telling them all your struggles, all your pain, and they say, it's not my job to offer guidance? Well, I would say, well, I've made it your job. I've said all this to you because I think you're wise and I think I can trust you. Please offer me guidance. So in my mind, one of the elements of wisdom is not just to take insight and knowledge, but also to be able to know what to do next and to share that in a loving, generous, and humble way. So when I think of wisdom, I think of two sides of wisdom. One is the experience of the mystical realm is a wisdom, not a knowledge, although you could call it a knowledge, I'll call it a wisdom. And then the other side is the wisdom of taking all your insights and everything that you know and being able to commit yourself on what needs to happen next. Another word on the second kind of wisdom, and that is this. I think all wisdom has to be tested. In my counseling, in the classes, if you've attended classes, you know, whenever we're talking about something and we consolidate it down to here's a thing to do, the person sometimes says in class in front of everybody, so what do I do? And I will give my bottom line advice. The greatest advice, by the way, I give, if I were to look at all the classes I've taught, where a person finally says, okay, so what do I do now? Does anybody remember what my most common articulated advice is? Go apologize. Go apologize. Because when people act without wisdom, they make mistakes, they bring pain to themselves, they bring pain to other people, they go in life directions that have led them to know something that does not help, and they suddenly see everything. The next thing they do is they must go apologize. By the way, when in a class, when we get it to that level, and the person is able to actually go and apologize, transformational things happen. I've had it just in this last series of classes several times, and it has really, really made an incredible difference. So one of the greatest wisdoms that we have is the wisdom to regret, the wisdom to have remorse, the wisdom to apologize. Okay. That's what people need to do. If you want to repair a relationship, oftentimes it is to have insight, remorse, the knowledge, the wisdom to apologize oftentimes gives a great, great new beginning to a relationship. Now, I want to share one last thing with you this morning before I stop, and that as I've been preparing for the Parsha day, studying Hasidic sources, the Sfat Emet, my favorite Hasidic master, pointed to a really interesting verse from the book of Proverbs, chapter 3. I'll be ending with this today. Book of Proverbs, chapter 3, if you want to go with me. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verse 19. It says the following. Adonai b'chokhmah yasad aretz. Adonai with wisdom founded the earth. Konen shamayim b'tivunah. Established the heavens with tivunah. Bedato tomot nivka'u. In da'at, knowledge, the deep abysses, the depths were cleaved. Ushachakim yirafu tal, and the heavens dripped with dew. Just a thought here. Notice it says, with chokhmah, the earth was founded, and with tivunah, the heavens were established. You think it might be different. That chokhmah is in the heavenly realm, and tivunah, discernment, would be in the earthly realm. Well, whoever wrote Proverbs, either they knew about Bezalel or the author of our Torah portions knew Proverbs. It's hard to know which is which. Which means that Proverbs 3:19 in the Torah was not written in the order of our text. We don't know who knew what, when, and how the text came together. But either the author of Proverbs 3:19 had read the story of Bezalel, or whoever wrote the story of Bezalel had already read Proverbs 3:19. But the idea is the wisdom, chokhmah, tivunah, and da'at that went into the building of the Mishkan, which were called qualities of Bezalel in Proverbs 3:19, these are aspects of divine wisdom that actually create the world. It's a stunning idea. In fact, it almost brings me to a kind of the Stoic idea of the logos, that human rationality is our experience of the divine mind that put the universe together. And therefore, when we act with chokhmah, tevunah, and dat, we're not only figuring out our lives, but we're somehow tapping into the ultimate wisdom of the universe, which can be a fully mystical experience. So this is where I want to link up the chokhmah of mystical knowledge and the chokhmah of practical knowledge. If you look at Betzalel in our Torah portion, last week's Torah portion, and you look at Proverbs 3:19, and I think this can only be experienced experienced mystically, that the knowledge I bring to my life and the knowledge that is the structure of the universe at some level are the same knowledge. I think that can only be apprehended mystically. But when you apprehend it mystically, you suddenly see the cosmos operating through you and you operating through the cosmos. Right? I'll conclude my talk for this morning, and we can continue this theme